Natural Farming.
Welcome, Austin.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to share this. I have a slideshow set up. I'm going to try and share. If anyone wants this presentation, my email is on the first slide. So just make a note of it. I'm happy to send it to anybody, or if there's just specific information, just always happy to answer questions. Okay, so I'm going to be giving a brief introduction really to Korean natural farming. It's a lot like any agricultural system that emphasizes imitating and sort of facilitating natural processes. Kind of view as like an infinitely large Russian nesting doll. There's just levels of depth that are kind of inherent in pretty much everything I'm going to talk about. We're really just going to kind of cover the surface of this. I'm hoping to explain some of the terminology. I know for myself, when I first encountered Korean natural farming, there's just lots and lots of three-letter acronyms, and I was like, yeah, I don't want to deal with learning all this. So I'm hoping to give a little bit of a breakdown of what some of those terms are, so that if you continue your own education into Korean natural farming, it's just a little bit of a framework to hang on to talk about the theory behind why we're doing what we're doing with natural farming, the inputs that are used. I will try and balance talking about sort of the inputs themselves and then how they're made. How they're made is can be kind of complicated. I'm going to sort of quickly cover that just because usually people want to know how it's made. Like I said, I'm happy to send this slideshow out, and I really encourage checking out some of the resources in here. There are a lot of excellent videos about how to produce everything that I'm going to talk about that'll probably be a little more helpful than just me making word sounds at the screen for learning how to actually make some of this stuff. I also wanted to point out there are a few different kind of terminologies that have been arising within Korean natural farming in the United States. That's largely due to it being really issues of translation. The founder speaks Korean. Not that many people I know who have really been bringing it to the U.S. are fully fluent. So there's just kind of some different terminology that you might come across when you're looking. There's a great Korean natural farming Facebook page that has a ton of info. So I'm hoping to explain, some of the terminology that might be different. So I guess before we get going, a little about myself and why I'm talking about this. I grew up in Southeast Alaska, which is a long ways from here. It's a really big temperate rainforest. I went to school in Montana at Bozeman State University. I actually studied psychology, and it was in my last year of psychology. I read The One Straw Revolution by Masanobu Fukuoka, who presents a natural farming system that I decided to pursue, I guess for personal fulfillment reasons other than continuing on with schooling. Went out to Oregon and worked on a 2¼ acre vegetable CSA for spring and fall. My dad's side of the family is from Texas, and while I was working in Oregon, he was like, hey, we've got lots of land if you want to come down and use some. So came down here in around 2013. I've been working for and currently manage Ewok Creek pecan orchards pretty much the whole time that I've lived here. My wife and I have a farm called Farmstead 42. We're not doing as much as we were, but we were doing a reasonable little market garden, going to markets, supplying some restaurants. I received a permaculture design certification in 2014, and my first exposure to Korean natural farming was like right after my PDC, and again, sort of seeing all the three-letter acronyms, like whatever, I was going to do permaculture. It wasn't till a little bit later when my wife and I started doing our own farming that I kind of revisited it. One of the huge benefits of Korean natural farming is it's all about keeping as much as possible on farm. You can do everything, you can make everything that you need in Korean natural farming, pretty much with brown sugar, white rice, and then there's one herbal tincture basically where you need to get some alcohol, but really it's brown sugar and white rice. When I look at the concept of sustainability, to me, that's as much as possible really just coming from on farm or the surrounding area. I'm a big believer in approximate steps to an end goal. You know, if I can get a 50-pound bag of brown sugar that came from the Gulf, you know, that's maybe a closer to a higher level of sustainability than if we're relying on, you know, purchased inputs from, you know, a manufacturer. So I've been dabbling off and on for about 5 or 6 years with varying levels of intensity. A lot of my education has come from online. Just tons and tons of information is available. Eric Drake Weinert is a huge resource. He's primarily who I've been learning from. He came down in 2019 and we helped host a little kind of conference with him and TOFGA, which was fantastic. So we got some hands-on. Chris Trump is another, no relation, is another excellent source. He runs probably one of the biggest farms in the world that's using Korean natural farming. It's a 600-acre macadamia nut farm. Really amazing kind of example of the productive potential with these really kind of low tech approaches. Cho Global is the kind of big, it's the Cho family are the ones who brought Korean natural farming from Korea and developed it, and they landed in Hawaii mostly. That's an excellent resource. And then also the University of Hawaii has a number of publications where they're actually, you know, running a lot of these inputs through actual trials, and there's a lot of good information available from there as well. I wanted to start with this because I'm a big believer in just, you know, fact check. I have my personal experiences with this. I've been practicing for a long time, but kind of like the infinite Russian doll, I might be only a few levels deeper than, you know, even just an experienced gardener. So always learning. I think it's always good to kind of follow up claims. So what is Korean natural farming? It is a synthesis of traditional Korean fermentation techniques, and it was combined by Cho Han-kyu with kind of Japanese natural farming methods. And ultimately, we're looking to work with what is already available in a system to facilitate the kind of positive, the natural feedback loop cycles of life that, you know, bring health to our crops, and emphasis on facilitating kind of what we would like to see rather than any kind of approach towards preventing what we do not want to see. So kind of boosting the good that is out there. So for this presentation, I'm going to try and cover as succinctly as possible, but still with some depth, kind of the main 9 inputs that are utilized in Korean natural farming, as well as how they tie together, how they're made, and the kind of recipes, the theory behind them. And the name, I have Core Solutions, No Substitutions. That's because what I'll be presenting is just kind of the, I would say top shelf, but sort of the ideal way of practicing. This is sort of the textbook presentation. There are a lot of different ways that one could accomplish the outcomes that we are looking to achieve through using these techniques. That's awesome. What I'll be, you know, kind of talking about is specifically if you want to say you're making fermented plant juice, KNF food, or FPJ, it's like this is the way to do it. If you're making your own personal, like Austin's funky plant juice, you know, there are ways to kind of manipulate things to, again, get a very similar outcome. using local resources. This is Korean natural farming. Obviously, we live in Texas, so what makes sense from the context of coming in Korea in terms of agricultural resources, we have different ones. And so there is certainly a level of regional specificity that can be applied to all of this. So I mentioned some terminology. Here you'll see listed at the top, there's fermented plant juice. That is kind of how it's made. You take a plant, you ferment it, and you extract the juice. The 3-letter acronym for that is FPJ. Drake with PureKNF has been working on terminology that speaks a little bit more to how it is used rather than how it is made, to kind of simplify things. So instead of FPJ, he calls it food or KNF food. So Oriental herbal nutrient, we have KNF medicine, so used as a medicine. So I have kind of all of those terminologies, the full name, the traditional abbreviation. You see a 3-letter acronym, that's the kind of standard way that it's presented. The KNF fuel, KNF cleanser, that's the sort of pure KNF organization's terminology. So I just put them all up there because you might see any of the names as you look more into this. So the first thing is the maintenance solution. This is kind of the fundamental mixture that's used in Korean natural farming. It provides the base of all of our foliar sprays, soil soak, seed soak. It can be used as a root drench. Sort of when in doubt, use this. It is 3 ingredients. It's the Oriental herbal nutrient, fermented plant juice, and brown rice vinegar, which means it's a medicine, a food, and a cleanser. It can be sprayed at any stage of plant growth, and it can be kind of targeted using additional inputs that are made to specifically boost stages of growth that we might want to be emphasizing. The difference between vegetative and reproductive and fruiting. You can tweak it a little bit to sort of facilitate those growth stages. With everything in KNF, healthy functioning systems really perform all of these naturally. It's when we start managing things more intensively for a specific human benefit, I think we need to be a little bit more mindful of just helping out. So what we are doing is really working to facilitate, not control, these natural processes. So Oriental herbal nutrient is 5 herbs: garlic, ginger, cinnamon, licorice, and angelica root. And it is 1 part of everything except for angelica root, which is a 2-part ingredient. They're all fermented with brown sugar. Fermenting really increases the bioavailability, and then it is additionally tinctured. So it has very, very rapid uptake across cell membranes. So you know that when you apply this, it's pretty directly being absorbed by the plant. Same for us. Most people know about garlic and ginger when you're sick, if you need a boost. So this is actually a great medicine both for our plants as well as ourselves. You don't develop any kind of resistance to it. It works to facilitate beneficials while suppressing pathogens. It stimulates metabolism, and all of these herbs have prebiotic and digestive stimulation properties, and they also help boost the immunity. So this can be, it's really tough to over apply. Where there's a will, there's a way. How this is made is for the fresh herbs, you use ginger and garlic, and then the other herbs are all dehydrated. So for the fresh herbs, you crush or slice them, mix them with an equal weight of brown sugar, and then fill up a container, preferably, well, ideally would be a pottery. If you have, a bunch of vessels like crocks or that kind of a thing, you can do it in that. That's ideal. I use glass. Glass is easy to come by. You're gonna fill this container 2/3, cover with a breathable lid, and that's gonna ferment for 5 to 7 days. When the fermentation is complete, you fill the jar with a 40 proof liquor. In Korea, they use a rice liquor. here I've used vodka and tequila before. I like trying to use the local stuff. It's ideal to not fill it all the way to the top before stirring. You fill it most of the way up, stir, and then fill it up to the top. And then it's covered with an airtight lid and then stirred daily every day for 2 weeks clockwise, which can talk to the biodynamic people about why clockwise is good. Once it's tinctured for 2 weeks, the liquid is strained into a separate container and then poured back into the original tincturing container, 1/3 full, and then the steps is repeated. So it gets filled back up to the brim, stirred every day, poured off, refilled, and repeated up to 5 times. For the dehydrated ingredients, there's an initial stage of rehydrating, which means they're chopped into pieces about a 1/2 inch and then put into a container with like a low proof alcohol. So beer, I think traditionally used rice wine. I've used apple cider, hard cider. And then that's left for a couple days to rehydrate. And once it is rehydrated, then the exact same process is followed, filled 2/3, brown sugar, fermented 5 to 7 days, and then it undergoes the tincturing process. For storage, it's room temperature, out of direct light, and airtight lids. The airtight's important. The alcohol will evaporate off. You keep everything separate until you're ready to use it, and then they're all combined together. Depending on your application, a home garden, a quart would last a really, really long time. The stuff is shelf stable almost indefinitely. It really gets better with age. This is used with a 1 to 1,000 ratio with water. The next part of the maintenance solution is the fermented plant juice, and it is a food at the most basic level. Additionally, it is a complete fertilizer in that it's made by using the growth tips of plants. So where all of the growth hormones, gibberellins, enzymes, compounds, they're all really concentrated at the growing tips of plants. So if we harvest that with this method, those can be extracted without heat or pressure, which means that a lot less will be denatured. So it really maintains the compounds in the growth tips without breaking them down. You can use this to bring, I would love for my crops to grow like ragweed. Well, we can take ragweed, turn it into a fertilizer that we can use on our crops. I have a picture here is a big bucket of prickly pear. That's one of my favorites just because the volume is incredible when spraying. The pecan orchard is really nice to figure out that you get a lot of yield out of prickly pear. It's very, very easy to make. You can mix sugar and plants together and keep them in a jar. You can make this. It can be customized. So depending on the characteristic of your plant that you're looking to facilitate, you can pick like a really prolific leafy green like dock or something like that could be used to put onto your lettuce or whatever leafy greens you're growing. So it can kind of be customized. Ideal not to use poisonous plants. There is something around if you ferment and then kind of go through this process. A lot of that will toxins can work themselves out, but just best not to use anything toxic. Ideally, with Korean natural farming, every input that we make is edible. I've personally eaten most of the stuff that I'm talking about here, which may or may not be a recommendation. So to make the FPJ out morning, ideally before the dew is gone, if it's rained, hold off. We want the biology that is naturally on the plant to be there when we go to ferment it. So it's best to hold off after a rain. It'll wash off a lot of that. You're gonna mix the plant tips after chopping them up at about either a 1/2 to a 1/3 of their weight with brown sugar. If you're using fruit, it's 1 to 1. You're going to pack a container about 2/3 full and then ferment it for 3 to 4 days. Then you pour off the liquid, which is what this picture is. I just put put everything in a paint strainer bag and then let it drip down. And then after it's poured off, if you add an equal volume of brown sugar, what it does is it fully saturates. It basically sucks up all the available water in that FPJ, so that kind of goes into preservation mode. If that's done, it's shelf stable for like a couple of years. If you put it in your fridge, it'll be good almost indefinitely. The third ingredient of the maintenance solution is the brown rice vinegar, which is a cleanser. You can also use apple cider vinegar. Second best supposedly is banana vinegar. Really a banana palm is very similar to a rice plant in a lot of ways. It's a single stalk that puts out a whole bunch of kind of carbohydrate dense grains. And the same with the banana. It acts as a cleanser. The main active ingredient in vinegar is the acetic acid, which has been shown to be really effective at suppressing a wide variety of pathogenic bacteria, and usually vinegar is no less than 4%. Additionally, if we make our own vinegar, we're going to get a lot of different enzymes, local biology, all of that. It helps with calcium uptake, helps with reproductive development in our crops, and then it also helps kind of flush out the system. It's as if you had a dock with multiple boats all trying to get in. If you have one tied up, you can't bring in another. It's kind of the same with receptors in plants. It's kind of how a lot of our neural compounds work. We have receptors. If something's blocking that receptor, it's not going to be able to take on anything else until that's been cleared up. The vinegar kind of helps with that in our spray. To make banana vinegar, if you want, you can chop up bananas 1:1 with brown sugar and ferment it. And then after it's fermented, you double the volume with water, cover that with a breathable lid. With a mother, in a couple weeks, you'll have vinegar. If you don't have a mother, then it's about 3 months, but one will form. It's just really, really simple way of making your own vinegar. Another really, really easy way to get vinegar is to go to the store and buy some vinegar. If you want to go that route, I frequently do. So this is the dilution rate for 1 gallon of water, the FPJ, OHN, and brown rice vinegar. And you can see it's 8 milliliters per gallon. So we're using these at very, very light dilutions. These have been tested by the University of Hawaii to see where kind of the best bang for your buck and nutrient uptake occurs. So with this, we're just a food, a medicine, and a cleanser is the kind of concept to think about that we're putting out into our system. It's something that sort of almost no matter what's going on is going to give things a boost. The only difference would be if you're dealing with some kind of disease situation, just use a lesser, make it more dilute. So add more water to this than you would. Normally, sometimes it's good to not include the fermented plant juice if you're really having issues with like molds, that kind of thing. To the maintenance solution, we can add a few different things to specifically target growth stages of the plants. The first I'll talk about is fish amino acid. I'm sure pretty much everybody's familiar with fish hydrolysate. It's pretty similar. The main difference is you can drink this. I would not drink fish hydrolysate. It is almost made exactly the same as a traditional fish sauce. This bucket that I have a picture of when I first made it, I don't know what happened. Something went wrong. We had it in my bedroom and it just smelled like the pit of despair, but it was able to add some different biology, a little more sugar, and actually turned it around to where it smelled sweet and delicious, though I think maybe I took a little taste of it, but if it goes funky, then I really wouldn't recommend that. It provides just protein, complete protein in a highly bioavailable form. So because this has been fermented, again, it's just ready for nutrient uptake. Usually you want to use deeper sea, ocean-going fish for this. You can also make it out of other animals. Why they use mongoose here, maybe feral hogs, I don't know. And then this is primarily used to boost vegetative growth. Or if you're growing greens, then it might be the only additive that you would add to your maintenance solution. To make it, you're gonna pick a container that you're gonna fill up 2/3. That 2/3 thing is really, really consistent. I've used 5-gallon buckets. It works great. 15 pounds of fish and 15 pounds of sugar work really well. You cover the bottom of the bucket with sugar, and then alternate layers of fish and sugar. So it's 2/3. Cover it up with a well, you can totally seal it. It just needs like a little bit of airflow. It's not like the others where it needs a lot. Check it out. If it starts going funky, sometimes the fish will kind of be floating, so you can push it down under the surface or put a rock on top. This is going to ferment for 3 to 6 months. Really, a year is kind of better. It's also great to pull out to kind of weird out house guests with your bucket of rotting fish. It's one of, in terms of bang for the buck, I think is just fantastic input. It's something that can really prevent you going to the store to buy fish hydrolysate. I mean, that stuff's not super cheap. And yeah, in terms of bang for the buck, this is hard to beat. The next kind of additive we can do is water-soluble calcium phosphate, or WCP, or KNF structure. Phosphorus cycle in the soil is pretty slow. It's frequently bound up in organic matter, and when we're growing intensively, we can kind of outstrip the natural availability. So this is highly bioavailable and provides an immediate boost. It helps kind of cell wall integrity and really kind of gives the plant bones. It's like just firm. It'll help firm out stalks. It really is good for facilitating root development and helps harden the plant against pest damage. And in making this, if a little bit of citric acid is added, it will pull out more of the calcium. So in using it, you get both the benefit of calcium as well as the phosphorus. How this is made is converting bone into biochar. So this picture here of the just a little charcoal lighter, and sitting on top of it is a paint can that I popped one hole in and just stacked it on top of there. So what we're trying to do is basically how you create biochar with kind of burning without oxygen. It leaves behind the carbon structure. We're basically trying to do the exact same thing with the bone. Once you have the bone, it's mixed with vinegar in a container, and it's roughly 1 part bone to 10 parts vinegar. For this, you can use any kind of vinegar. So even just the white distilled is fine, because this is a dissolution. So we're extracting phosphorus into the liquid solution. It's going to bubble not too vigorously, but you'll see a lot of bubbling going on, and it's done when it stops. And if you aren't sure, you can add another piece of the bone charcoal into the container. If you see more bubbling, then you know that it needs to go a little bit longer. After the bubbling is stopped, you strain it, and it is ready for use. This will be used with the maintenance solution during kind of the changeover period from vegetative growth, where we would primarily be using the fish amino. When the plant reaches sexual maturity, for lack of a better term, and is starting to move into flowering and reproductive, the phosphorus demand goes up a bit. So that's when we start applying the phosphorus. It's kind of thematic with the natural farming, is just really looking to support the plant where the plant is in its natural growth stage, instead of arbitrarily kind of coming in with like, well, we just, whatever, 2 teaspoons of X every 2 weeks. We're really trying to be targeted towards facilitating our crops with where they are. The next one that we can use is water-soluble calcium. And this is really only used during the fruiting stage of our, I'm going to turn on the light. So this will help sweeten fruit. It facilitates carbohydrates being converted into sugars. It aids in fruit and seed development. If you apply this foliar, then it's just a really fast bioavailable calcium source. So it can help with like blossom end rot, any number of calcium deficiency issues this can really help out with. Additionally, it can help with post-harvest resiliency. It'll kind of keep things from wilting quite as much. And I've been pretty amazed after harvesting, greens, just spraying a little bit of this, diluted with water onto the leaves, even after harvesting. It just kind of helps them stay crispy. This is made out of a calcium-rich material, traditionally eggshells. You can also use seashells or calcium carbonate. I've made it out of the Tractor Supply big bags of calcium. It's already toasted, I think, or those bags have already been heated. You're going to toast your material over medium heat. That's mostly with the eggshells. You really just don't want a lot of that. The lining of the shell, you don't want to go in there. It'll get rancid and really gross. So you're just going to kind of stir the eggshells. If you're using those in a pan, just keep them moving so that they don't start burning. And then you can kind of winnow them out. If you're outside with a fan and a breeze, you just kind of drop them down, and a lot of the lining will just kind of blow away. You're looking for just a light golden brown color across the whole eggshell. Same thing as the Calphos. You're going to put 1 part eggshell or oyster shell, whatever you're using, into 10 parts vinegar. If you go a little bit more with the eggshells, that's not going to hurt anything. Same for the Calphos. It's not going to hurt anything. If it's a little more, it's just going to guarantee that it's going to get saturated. This will be a very violent reaction compared to the bones. If you dump them all in at once, it can volcano out and kind of explode everywhere. So just doing it a little slowly is good. As soon as you see things stop bubbling, add in a little bit more, no bubbles, it's done. And then same thing as the rest. You just strain it out into a separate container. Both this and the water-soluble calcium phosphate are shelf stable immediately. They're just pretty much minerals in solution, and they're kind of good indefinitely. The last boost, well, I listed this one with the others. It's seawater. It's a mineral input. It goes with most growth stages when we need a little bit of a mineral supplement. Seawater contains all of the trace minerals, and if it's diluted to about 1:30 with fresh water, the ratio of trace minerals is very, very similar to what we have as humans in our blood and what a lot of plants have in their tissues. If you're actually collecting from the ocean, then you're also going to get a really diverse biology, which is great. Really helps sweeten fruit in the last kind of stages of development. You're pulling from the ocean, try and get it from the surface water. That's where we're kind of going to get the most life happening, and sort of the edge between the air and the sea. Again, mixed when it's being applied onto our crops, it's going to be diluted at 1:30. Another option, if you don't feel like going to the coast, is you can just get some good sea salt and dilute 1 gram per liter of salt into fresh water. And it's just a really broad spectrum, comprehensive trace mineral supplement. We also have a couple ways of boosting the biology that is in our environment. We can make a lactic acid bacteria solution, and then also we have some ways of collecting and propagating indigenous microorganisms. This is the last, I'm talking about this last, but really this is the really the foundation, not just of Korean natural farming, but in my opinion, in any good ecological agriculture system. If you aren't taking care of the soil biology, then I think the mark is really being missed, because that's what's facilitating nutrient uptake. The symbiotic relationship between our crops, and then soil biology is something that is absolutely essential, and we also weirdly know very, very little about. So lactic acid bacteria, also called LAB. Drake was using the term KNF police. I don't know if maybe that needs some updating. The concept is that lactic acid bacteria are a very, very robust order of bacteria. They're aerotolerant anaerobes, which means they do not rely on oxygen. However, they have ways of protecting themselves against it in aerobic environments. So they can do just fine in either anaerobic and aerobic conditions. What this means is they're really good at kind of, in the terminology has always been kind of like policing and kind of getting things back in order, but really they just help balance out where there is imbalance in your system. There's several strains that produce specific compounds that have been shown to suppress pathogenic and spoilage bacteria. Lactobacillus, almost ubiquitously present in food, really contributes to a lot of our microbiome health. I don't know if anyone here has come across EM1 or bokashi. Both of those are really predominantly about a third lactic acid bacteria. Has really broad applicability, can help with combating specific pathogens. It can be used as a probiotic for livestock, odor control. I've used it on myself and it works. And it's just a general tool to bring some balance into unbalanced systems, kind of at the biological level. This is very easy to make. You use rice wash water. And so that's just when you're making white rice, you run some water through it, it gets really milky. What that is a very easily digested starch. And there's usually some sediment involved. So you want to pour this wash water that has all that starch in it into a nice shallow dish, ideally avoiding any sediment that may have settled out of it. What that sediment will do is on this smaller jar, you can see there's some whey or some of the white stuff on the side that's stuck there. That happens when the sediment happens, and it just kind of causes difficulties for getting a really clean separation. When that water's in a shallow dish, you want to put it near a fresh air source, close to room temperature. Lactobacillus really thrives at room temperature. So this dish is acting as a landing pad for all sorts of diverse airborne biology. Lactobacillus will be in there. When it's taken after 1 to 3 days, you're really just looking for a subtle change in smell. You don't want to see a bunch of like icebergs forming. That's when it's too far gone, or like a thick film. You'll know that it's too far gone. It's just a very, very subtle change. I'm gonna take this and pour it into milk at 1 part of the rice wash water to 10 parts milk. Again, more wash water is not going to hurt at all. It's plenty to inoculate it, but a little bit more is just not going to hurt. It takes about 2 to 4 days, and what happens is it separates. You can see here the top is basically the curd. I mean, really, this is like making farmer's cheese. The top is the curd, the bottom's the whey. The whey is what we are looking for in Korean natural farming. You just strain off, separate them. Usually like a t-shirt or something like that can be kind of nice for this, just because the sediment can be so fine. If the curd gets into the way in your storage container, it can get a little funky, but it'll take some time. If you want to have it be shelf stable for, for really, really long time, you can super saturate it, which just means, again, mixing it with an equal weight or volume of brown sugar, basically until a little bit of brown sugar, you keep mixing in until a little bit settles out in the bottom of your jar, and you'll know that it's fully saturated. Once that's done, it's shelf stable almost indefinitely. I've used that as a coffee sweetener, just general probiotic. Drake puts it in his laundry. In with his laundry to kind of inoculate his clothing. I have not tried that myself. The next part is the indigenous microorganisms, or IMO, or KNF microbes. It's a process for gathering basically the best of what nature has to offer on the biological front, bringing it back out of the woods, out of the forest, bringing it home, taking multiple collections, growing them out under ideal conditions, and then combining them with your site-specific field soil to basically harmonize both what is available naturally in the environment and then kind of whatever might be going on your farm. The box here in this picture is what is used, or what I used for a collection. See, what you're really looking for is that kind of like light, white, fluffy growth is a sign of a good collection. So to do one of these, make al dente white rice. This is where you can, when you're doing this, you can take the rice wash water and make some LAB. You can make it al dente. So, if you took it to a party, you will be like, you don't know how to make rice. You want it to be crunchy and, well, not too crunchy, but basically don't want it to compact into an anaerobic kind of mass. You want it to sort of stay light and fluffy so that plenty of air can move through. You're going to take a wooden box. I tend to make my boxes kind of the size that will fill the vessel that I'm going to use to store 2/3. So that can be pretty specific to what you yourself plan on utilizing. You want to fill the container 2/3 full with the rice, making sure it's not compressed. Ideally, you're going to find somewhere that's under, if there's somewhere on your property or somewhere in the area where that it just has not been disturbed, or there's particularly healthy trees, or bamboo groves are pretty nice for this. Not that we have a ton of those around in Austin, but they have a good relationship with indigenous biology. Really what you're looking for is an area where the biology has been allowed to kind of go through its evolution as undisturbed as possible. A lot of bacteria will go through a generation in about a half hour. So, if we can get collections from undisturbed areas, then we're basically bringing the best of what natural selection can produce at a biological level, and getting it to colonize this readily available starch source. What you do is scrape back just a little bit of scrape back leaf mold, that kind of thing, maybe 1/4 inch of the soil. Put this box out with a covered lid, like paper towel works fine, rice paper works fine, you can staple it down, t-shirts work just fine. It's good to protect it with like a cage or something against rodents. So once you kind of scraped away a little bit of the leaf litter and soils and set the box down, you can kind of build a cocoon around it with that same leaf litter, hopefully your chunks of fungal hyphae, that kind of a thing. That's really, what you'd like to see. Then it stays out for about 3 to 5 days. Really depends on environment. I mean, I've had them take as long as 11 days. It just kind of depends on temperature, time of year, a lot of environmental variables can go into how long that takes. What you are looking for is the bottom of the box to feel kind of like warm laundry. That means that it's been colonized and things are reproducing quickly. When you take this collection out, you bring it home, and then as quickly as possible, mix it with brown sugar at a 1-to-1 ratio. What this does is basically tie up all the available water and moisture that was in this collection, which sort of puts things into a stasis mode. Some things will sporulate and then kind of shut down, so it sort of freezes them in place to be activated or kind of woken up again later. What you don't want to see is a whole bunch of like black mold. If you're seeing all kinds of tie-dye, crazy colors, it's just like not ideal. I mean, ideally is the like really light, white, fluffy looking kind of cotton candy stuff. However, we're really looking for diversity first and foremost. So as long as it's about 80-20, like white hype A to colors, like the pink is pretty good. I think blue or like not so great, red, not so great, black. Black mold's definitely not good. So you can still use them if you're seeing a little bit of different colors, and really, as long as it's just a small part of a more kind of diverse collection, even saving back ones that kind of don't go that well has value, because it's just going to be so biologically diverse. The chances are through this process, if there are kind of an imbalance of pathogens, it'll work itself out. So when you have multiple collections of this preserved IMO with the brown sugar, what you can do is pick a carbon and carbohydrate source. Traditionally, in Korea, they use mill run. Wheat mill run is pretty common. Around here, I mean, it's really just depends so much on what's locally available. I mean, Barton Creek's mill is probably a great place to check it out. In Hawaii, they found that they had to use kind of more wood chips in this mixture just because the humidity was so high. Things were just kind of cooking too quickly. So adding in more carbon helped sort of slow down this process. What we're going to do is take at least 3 of the past collections. More is better. I'm going to put them in a bucket with water. And then to that, we're going to add our Oriental herbal nutrient, fermented plant juice, the lactic acid bacteria, brown rice vinegar, and seawater. So basically what we're doing is taking a not totally raw, but a very clean slate of a carbon and carbohydrate, taking diverse biological collections, feeding that biology, as well as providing a medicine that'll help suppress pathogens and facilitate beneficials, and then the brown rice vinegar, which will do the same. And then we're going to pour that food and biology onto your pile of substrate. Just like a 50-pound bag of wheat mill run is all you need. It's ideal, like more than 50 pounds is good. Less than a couple hundred is probably good. And it's more of the like, I mean, I don't know, I'm fairly young, but my back gets tired turning big 200-pound piles of things. So just, know that however big you make it is how much you will have to shovel. Once it's wet down, you just have to turn the pile as often as needed to keep the temperature below 120 degrees. The first time I did this, I don't know what I did wrong, but the temperature kept spiking, and I mean, it probably wasn't worth the effort, but I was waking up every 6 or 3 hours pretty much to go out and turn this pile. I really wanted it to work. It usually is fine. Just a couple times a day is all you'll have to do. What we're doing in keeping the temperature down is favoring ideally our beneficial fungi. Just prefer cooler temperatures. When you get a really hot compost, you more or less not quite pasteurized, but kind of when they, when a pile can get up to like 140, 150, and then just takes time for more of those lower temperature classes of biology to reestablish themselves. So by keeping it cooler, we're really trying to lean towards propagating fungi as much as possible. Another quick note about the fermented plant juice is that in essence, the theory is that by collecting what is contained within the plants, their kind of complete nutrient kind of enzymatic profile and all that, when that's mixed with sugar, theoretically, we are imitating root exudates in a very basic way, providing simple sugar and complex plant hormones. The idea being that if we can essentially mimic root exudates, then we can propagate the biology that would normally be associated with a root without actually needing the living plant in place. So once that process has been completed, which takes about a week to 11 days, that can be used basically as a compost for compost tea or just as a biological inoculum. Ideally, what you do is then take an equal part of your field. I wrote soil, it really should be dirt. So you want kind of the lowest quality dirt that you can find near where you are growing. Then you mix that 1-to-1 with this highly kind of cultivated IMO3 collection, where you're introducing just sort of the best of the best of the indigenous biology that nature has to provide, that we've just thrown out and fed, and then introducing that into the local conditions of your farm, and then basically repeating the process, wetting it down again to 60% moisture content with that same recipe for IMO3. Same thing, keeping it below 120 degrees. After this is done, about a week to 11 days, it's ready to use. It's gonna be either used dry and lightly sprinkled, like a little bit goes a really long way, or it can be used instead of compost for a compost tea. And you can brew a liquid IMO. There are ways of fermenting animal feed, something that I'm not going to get into in this presentation, but there's a lot of info about, is really Korean Natural Farming really excels in animal agriculture systems. And they have a way of creating a pig and chicken pens where the substrate, the floor that they're on, is basically fermenting constantly, and the animals can derive a decent percentage of their diet from just kind of the products of fermentation within their own confines. So the IMO process is used as a part of that. So this slide here shows dilution ratios for milliliters for a gallon. What you'll notice is that for leaf, even though I talked about just the fish amino going in there, there is a little bit of water soluble calcium phosphate, and a little bit of lactobacillus. So if you just stick to the maintenance solution, those 3, OHN, brown rice vinegar, and fermented plant juice, you're solid. Like, that is going to be helpful almost all the time. You know for sure if you just put in fish amino acid during vegetative, you're going to be helping, giving the plant what it needs. If you just put in WCP with the maintenance solution during reproduction, doing fine, and same for calcium. This provides a little bit more of a targeted way of approaching this, and I highly encourage that you all kind of continue checking out some of the resources there to get further into the nutritive theory. It's really dense. You too can inoculate spoons. I use these to mix up a couple of my IMO collections. I washed them in the dishwasher, which I know you're not supposed to do, and opened it up, and they were totally fuzzed over. It was crazy. And then also KNF is easily scalable. On the right, we have a little 5-gallon bucket brewer used for the home garden. On the left is a 50-gallon tea brewer and a 500-gallon sprayer that I use at the pecan orchard. And that is, I think, it for me. Hopefully that was reasonably succinct, though it took a while. Like I said, it's super dense. There's really a lot to this system, and yeah.
Ooh, let me get my sound going.
I have a question about the calcium. We have really high calcium here. So how would that relate?
Really high calcium
Soil? Yeah.
So it all kind of depends, because a lot of the times, and this is something I'd have to look into, a lot of times it's not necessarily bioavailable. And so all of this is very much, this is a broad kind of overview. It is of course going to be context specific. If you know you're in a situation where your plant is just kind of getting too much calcium, then maybe it'd be good to kind of back off of that a little bit. However, because the dilution rates are so low and they're being applied at, targeted times of growth, it's really difficult. I mean, if you came out and sprayed this stuff like at crazy concentrations, then it would probably, definitely cause some problems. But because the dilution rates are so low, generally it's not going to impact, too much the plant getting more than it really needs.
So these are generic, not dependent on what your soil types are, particularly. They're generic for the type of farming this is.
Correct.
Not necessarily for whether you have acid soil or alkaline soil or whatever.
Absolutely. And all of this should help kind of whatever's going on with the introduction of IMO process with using the spray inputs. A lot of that should help kind of balance things out. If you're, if you're acidic, it'll help, get a little more alkaline, and vice versa.
Yeah, I find it really interesting because you go to the Korean restaurant and they present you a smorgasbord of fermented things, depending on which restaurant, what kind of ferment things they like to ferment. And I thought this is really interesting. It's a similar kind of idea of, the way they eat.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of one of the things I've enjoyed about it personally, is that, if done right, then everything should be edible, which I'm kind of a fan of spraying things on my plants that, I can eat.
Mm-hmm. There's some questions in the chat. Can you use molasses?
Oh, yeah. Let's see. So for brown sugar and not white, in Korea, they have access to a lot of what's called jaggery, which is just a really raw sugar. The idea is that you want that molasses in there for the minerals content. You don't want a highly refined processed product. And to my knowledge, they do not, I have never seen it recommended to use anything other than cane sugar. I would be happy to investigate that further, but it's either just raw, unrefined cane sugar or brown sugar. Either of those I know for sure works. Coconut and date, I am not positive on.
And then the next question was, can you use brown rice for other grains besides white?
White rice is preferable. It's because it's the starch is more simple. The husk on the how brown rice is finished it's just a little bit of a more complex carbohydrate that's going to select for slightly different things. With the white rice, it is such a generic, such a just basic starch source. Almost anything can utilize that as a food. So after we get that big sweeping collection, then we kind of refine down from there. Using something like potato or taro, I mean, you can do it. It's just going to limit the range of biology that's collected.
And then Angel, you had some questions?
Yeah. You were talking about, the time of year of doing the IMO creation. I'm guessing summer is probably the worst time. Probably get a lot of like competing. And I guess I know this from like growing mushrooms outdoors, like you get a lot of trichoderma and stuff competing out.
So ideally, you could collect kind of throughout the year. And with trichoderma specifically, I mean, there are agricultural inputs that are just trichoderma cultivated for its competitiveness with other fungi. So while it is absolutely something that you don't want when you're trying to grow oyster mushrooms or whatever, maybe on your plant leaf when it's getting attacked by a pathogenic fungus, you maybe do want some of that in there. So with a lot of this stuff, just maximum diversity is the idea. If you could really get a couple collections during the summer, a couple in the winter, spring, fall, by pulling from those different times and then kind of combining them, theoretically just getting this massive slice of the indigenous biology.
And kind of just going back again to like, do you use it sort of like a grain spawn, like you're keeping that like those microorganisms that then like add to all of your other inputs?
Exactly. So the first collection there, when it's the white rice in the woods, and then you bring it back and mix in the brown sugar, that's more or less an inoculum.
Okay.
And so having multiple of those collections, then you combine those together to continue the growing out process. They can also be used as they are. I mean, I made a lot of tea with IMO too, that first white rice into brown sugar. When I looked at it in the microscope, I saw a lot of what looked like water molds and that kind of thing. And that will sort of be consistent. The earlier in the IMO stage you use it, the less developed towards those beneficial fungi it's going to be. It's just going to be a little more bacterial when it's just, easy starch source. Once we get into having the more carbohydrate, wood chips, that kind of thing, as well as the plant juice, then it starts providing some more nutrition for different classes of fungi.
And I'm curious, like with the sort of hyphal threads and the mycelium that's growing on the rice, like does it ever create fruiting bodies? Does that happen in certain environments?
Not that I've seen with the initial collection. Usually, because that's so fast, it's going to be more of like quicker molds with trichoderma. I've never seen a fruiting body. I have seen pictures of fruiting bodies coming out of people's IMO piles when they're if they're sitting or left moist, where they can kind of continue to grow. Ideally, with the storage on the IMO, you let it kind of dry out and keep it in like a brown paper bag or something like that. And so without moisture, it's not going to keep going.
And do you know, like, if it's because there's all the like endophytic, which are like good for the arbuscular growth of the plant, and then you have the endo and the ecto. Like how, like do we know like what kind of mycelium is growing on the rice? I'm just
so
curious.
Generally speaking, we don't even worry about it, right? Like we know less than 2% of what's of soil biology. Even the best top tier soil scientists, we just know so little. A lot of this is if you go to these undisturbed environments, whatever's there that's leading to that being healthy, probably assume that it's kind of doing its thing, so that really looking for a specific, is it this mycorrhizal or that, it's just so,
Yeah.
there's no real honing in on it, though I would be surprised. I think the university has done some, maybe more qualitative analysis to see what's in there. But again, because it's so going to be so utterly site specific, it's just really, again, that kind of trusting in, the natural diversity to sort out any imbalances.
Yeah. And it seems like for the most part, you're just at least wanting to get like something decomposing the carbon to make it available then to the plants.
Yeah.
Which is one of the more important forest floor types of organism or, fungi.
Yeah, and then with the fermented plant juices, again, that's, the theory is that it is simulating a root exudate, which means that, there should be more, specifically, beneficial classes of biology that normally would require a root to be there.
Yeah.
I'm quite surprised how many steps, how complex.
Yeah.
I know that.
It's like a recipe for your plants,
I've tried to ferment my worm castings from my worm bin with molasses, and it had mixed with that. I'm wondering if there's a way we could have maybe a demonstration of maybe one part that people could utilize, because it seems multiple layers.
I think the easiest one is really the lactic. Actually, looking at this
lactic acid one,
yeah, the lactic acid bacteria.
And you've probably done that if you've made pickles. I've made pickles. I've made olives, so that was a similar process.
Oh yeah, and I mean the fermented plant juice, really similar. Like making kraut, you're just using sugar, not salt. Like it's stuff that is really quite simple. The IMO process is absolutely in depth, and I really recommend checking out some videos, and also just starting to practice, because it seems complicated, but ultimately it's fairly straightforward once you start practicing. And kind of one of those things where usually I'm pretty happy to just like go buy something at the store, but personally I like the idea of that on-farm resiliency. If a 50-pound bag of sugar and rice can kind of provide your farm inputs for a couple years potentially, I think there's some tremendous value in not relying on the external supply chains.
Yeah. There's more questions. People want the presentation. Can it be a link to it be put in the chat potentially?
Well, we have it. It's recorded on our YouTube channel. So yeah.
I think
okay. And then also, if people who actually want the presentation will just email me a request. I'm actually like borrowing a friend's laptop and at my work to do this, and so I can I could just, it'd probably just be easier to email specifically if people are interested in the entire presentation.
Okay, and then the bottom question was what I had said about what simple ones we could be doing.
The simple ones, yeah. So really, the fermented plant juice, one of the easiest, and it is also just like pretty quick to get going. I'll say if you are just going to use that, make sure to include vinegar with it, because just using that food source without the balance of the vinegar can sometimes feed stuff that maybe you don't really want to be feeding. Also say that Oriental herbal nutrient is available to purchase online from a couple of the sources that I linked, and for getting going, if you want to experiment, I would recommend just buying some of it and then trying it out and seeing to actually make Oriental herbal nutrient as kind of like a 2.5 month commitment. People are really interested. I have been considering kind of producing larger quantities of stuff to have available. So that's I don't know. That's a thing. If you really, really want some, I can see what I can do about making it, or talking to some of my connections to make it available.
Yeah, that was I had
Angela,
another.
real quick, that somebody texted me that YouTube has questions online. I can't see them,
Okay,
but if you can see
let me yeah, let me pull it up. I my laptop is actually acting weird too, so I'm gonna look on my phone. I'm getting a lot of
anyone else have a question they want to unmute?
let's see, would coffee chap would that be a good substitute for the mill run?
Worth a shot. That's one that I have not heard about specifically, because coffee does have some pretty stout chemical compounds. I am not 100% sure about what that might bring to the table. Really, with all of this stuff, it's totally possible. Say, make some and see how it goes.
Mm-hmm. And then there was one other question, and I think you may have started to get into the kind of the root trichomes and stuff. They asked, how does the plant uptake this?
With the most of the inputs can be applied as a foliar spray. I'll actually say that all of them can be made as a foliar spray. Additionally, IMO can be used just dry, spread across your soil, and all of the inputs can also be utilized as a soil drench or a seed soak, or if you're transplanting, you can put stuff in the solution right before you transplant. So it's pretty versatile. Foliar application is generally the approach that is.
And I have one other question too. You know, you had mentioned there's like a few things that people can actually purchase, you know, maybe if they're wanting to get their feet wet. But I'm kind of curious, you know, because most, like with very successful applications, things get kind of commercialized eventually. Do you feel like the sort of like life of Korean natural gardening, it's so early in its inception, and we're just starting to see studies, you know, in Hawaii of how it's being used and the benefits. Do you think that at some point that it will become like a shelf, something you could buy off the garden shelf?
Well, it wouldn't surprise me. Chris Trump, who I linked to his stuff, he for a while was running like almost a full kind of store. I'll be curious. You know, a lot of the theory around this is using what's on your farm.
Mm-hmm.
So sure, you could buy a fermented plant juice from someone else, but it's going to have kind of just stuff from their farm, when you could be looking at your surrounding environment, getting the biology that, you know, is growing in your area and propagating that out. Another thing is that ultimately making this stuff is cheap, like just really, really inexpensive. It can be a little bit time consuming, but you know, with just picking a weekend, it's possible to make enough of this. I mean, I had made enough to spray 90 acre pecan orchard, you know, like 2 batches of FPJ. So the scalability is really straightforward if you just take a little while to make some of this stuff kind of over a short time period. It's not hard to make enough for a year, you know, in a short amount of time, and then you're just kind of done. It's not like you need to be making inputs all the time, which I kind of was first getting into it, all excited about trying out different FPJs and that kind of a thing. But ultimately, you know, the point is to be spending more time farming and engaging with the land rather than making stuff in your. There's
such a great variety of fermented things to eat now, much more than there was 10 years ago. I think that's great, definitely a great business opportunity to consider fermenting for the farm, or fermenting for the garden. I really think that's able to make that shelf stable, and that would be a great way to move forward and promoting, you know, microorganisms in your soil.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I was telling Danielle, and I saw this from the photos you shared that you use prickly pear, and so one of my favorite wines to make. I do a lot of like wild fruit wines, and so I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna make some wine for my plants, some wine for me. Just like have two little fermentation buckets going.
Yeah, yeah,
So
nice.
I'm actually trying out the prickly pear thing now. I kind of dug around a little bit last weekend, and I don't know, I might mess it up, but I'll see how it turns out.
My prickly pear froze to the ground, and they're all like little right now, but they're coming back up. I'm like, I can't harvest them yet.
Yeah. Yeah. So how long did it take you to kind of get like the confidence of, feeling like you really got it?
Oh, well, still working on that. In
Yeah.
terms of making stuff, I mean, really, if you make the inputs once, like good to go. There's a lot of consistency, like filling a container 2/3 full with like half to an equal weight of brown sugar and letting it sit. I mean, it's just almost all of them are kind of similar in that way. For the calcium and phosphorus, it's just one part to 10 parts in vinegar. Super easy to make, particularly with the calcium phosphate, charcoaling bone and throwing it in a bucket of vinegar is really really easy, and you can make enough of that. I think for a 4-gallon backpack sprayer, it works out to be, I think, like 1 teaspoon of the maintenance solution input. So it's just, a little bit goes a long way. So once you make some, you're good to use it. And then, as far as the confidence goes, just, I don't know, I feel like there's always more to practice and learn.
Mm-hmm.
Is that all the questions on YouTube that there were?
Yeah, there were just those two. Catherine, she did ask, how do you get foliar spray up to on your pecan farm?
That's where I think that last picture I had, we have an air blast sprayer that is PTO powered. It's a 500-gallon tank, and it has just a gargantuan fan that throws it up there, which this year we really didn't do a lot with the KNF for our program. I'd like to revisit it. I juggle a lot of balls. Sometimes it's kind of hard to take the time to develop all the inputs to use where we are. I've been doing a lot. You mentioned the worm bins. I do a lot with worm farming, and I've really been using KNF stuff more for my worms than almost anything else right now. I like taking the collection, mixing it together, and then giving that to the worms, and then kind of have them managing managing the system
before you give it to them, or you're giving them what the excess, or what are you giving them?
Basically, that IMO recipe, that first where you take the multiple collections with the maintenance solution mixed together. Basically, I'll kind of like make a pre-compost with that and then feed it to the worms.
Okay. I had a friend this summer when I guess there's still tomatoes growing right now, but he gave me just a jar of something that smelt to me like tapache. He's like, my friend gave me this. I use it on my tomatoes as a foliar spray. And I was like, this smells like tapache. And so I'm guessing it was some sort of like input, kind of using the same kind of methodologies, but he said that they used pineapples. It's just how you make tapache with the pineapple peel or the like husks, or I don't know what you call the like outside of the pineapple, but and then like brown sugar, which is how you make tapache basically.
Yeah, it's something. I mean, this is something I thought about or think about quite a bit with kind of ecological farming systems. You start seeing a lot of similarities. It's just like nature does things a particular way. People come up with lots and lots of different words to describe it. Mm-hmm. And what I presented on was Korean natural farming. Does it get to trademark working with nature? No, absolutely not. And so, I think there are just many different ways that the fundamental concepts that are sort of manifested in Korean natural farming can be tweaked for custom usage. Are you Korean natural farming anymore? Maybe someone will get irritated who kind of represents the brand, I guess. But ultimately, the principles of working with local ingredients, fermentation, probiotic farming, it's all stuff that is not totally ubiquitous, but there are lots of places that have come up with very similar kind of concepts for approaching growing things.
There's another question. Do you have any research that you could point to for any of these methods, thinking about incorporating IMO of treatments for my master's soil building research in Texas State?
So if you, on the PureKNF Foundation website, there are links to studies produced by the University of Hawaii and Hilo that cover all of the inputs that I just talked about. And it was, I need to look at them again to see exactly what's in them, but they performed, like a study on all of them, and all of that is available on the PureKNF Foundation website. Something else that's happening that I'm kind of interested in exploring is in Hawaii, the NRCS. So they have the matching grant, high tunnels. Well, in Hawaii, they're doing a matching grant for people to install Korean natural farming pig pens, because it's been recognized as a best practices livestock management system. And I will be getting some pigs with one of the neighbors here pretty soon. So we're, kind of talking about seeing if we can, work with the NRCS in Hawaii to work with our NRCS to see if we couldn't kind of trial out this pig pen system. That's kind of the main area, or one of the biggest areas that Korean natural farming has really flourished in, is in livestock husbandry. Supposedly the Chinese military adopted it when during the Beijing Olympics, they travel with their pigs, like kind of caused some issues within the local communities. They found out about Korean natural farming and then adopted the methods, there. And now I think Beijing offers a master's and PhD program in Korean natural farming. So it's, just made its way over to the US a little more recently, starting to gain some more acceptance, but it is pretty well vetted within the kind of academia as well.
Yeah, chickens.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm curious. I know about Trad Cotter's, like he does a thing with fungi, like to make a bed underneath your chicken coop to like absorb odors and break down the, help break down, and you inoculate it with a certain type of fungi. I've learned about that, but I'm sure it's all, yeah.
That could be a business, I tell you.
Yeah, and you're kind of feeding your mushrooms too with what they want, so you get some fruiting bodies as well. But well, can you share a little bit about what people might expect from the in-person hands-on class?
A couple more questions.
Okay, there are. Sorry.
Everything sounds so healthy with so much biology and chemistry. Do you ever get sick? Fantastic presentation.
If I practiced as much as I preach, I probably wouldn't get sick, but it happens.
The next one, Elaine Ingram mentioned that you can kill a lot of EMs by using the wrong type of sprayer as the spray goes out. Anyone suggest a small home garden size sprayer that would be best to keep the most EMs alive?
I think what you want to look for is a diaphragm pump. It does not generate high pressure. I have heard that pressure over 20 psi will start blowing up your biology. Yeah, I think looking at a diaphragm pump sprayer, those are the ones that I've heard of as being kind of biologically safe. Ideally, you would want to make something, run it through your sprayer, and then check out on a microscope what you've just run through your sprayer to see.
And then the last one, thank you. I have from Hunter. I have some friends in Kohala region of Hawaii that would be interested in doing some research on this and would love to connect over email after. Thanks. Awesome.
Yeah, great. Shoot me an email. We'll chat.
So go ahead. You want to talk about the class on December 1st?
Oh yeah. So it'll be kind of cover a lot of the same material with more depth. And we will actually get hands-on with making some of the inputs, and exactly which those are, I have not yet really settled on. But yeah, definitely peeling back some more layers of the onion and more hands-on with actually making this stuff to hopefully build up some confidence to be able to just kind of go for it.
Nesting dolls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been really great presentation. It's a lot of information, but I feel like I have a better understanding for sure.
Well, I presented at TOFGA on this, and we're kind of planning on getting a little bit more into the education side of things with our farming endeavors. So it's really nice having the opportunity to present it. And that being said, I really appreciate feedback again over email. There's a lot to it, so figuring out the most kind of succinct, effective ways of communicating what it's all about is I appreciate anybody's personal insight that they might want to share there.
Well, everyone participated great. I think you did such a good job explaining something very deep and more understanding of Korean culture. I sure learned something. And I want to thank everyone for coming out and sticking with it. It was amazing. And hopefully we can meet in person and you can give us a demo.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And next month, we're sticking with fermentation with Sheena's Pickles.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thanks.